In a deep and dark forest, a man is in exile. He was a prince, but what's the use of a title when you're in exile? It was a deep, tropical forest, and the monsoon was just about to come, so he was looking out at the dark, luring clouds. His wife of some 13 years, that was as long as they were in exile, she had just found some flowers and she was threading them in a garland. The exiled man's brother was up on a tree. And because he was dealing with wood, he was making swords of wood and arrows from slender branches. And he was even piercing certain feathers to give it a fine, swift drift. Somebody was watching, but none of us could see the somebody who was watching. And what did she look like? She was as large as Shoreditch. And her feet were very much like blurry Bigfoot. She had a large cavernous mouth, an eye that revolved like the TARDIS in Doctor Who. And there was blood spewing from every orifice you could imagine. The earwax from her ears coiled right out to Southwark Bridge. And everybody mistook it for pollution, but actually it was her earwax. Her nails were like talons, and they were used to gouge out the liver and the intestine of bear and fox and hedgehog and all other wild animals. She had great big skins around her girth as large as Shoreditch. But when she looked at that man in exile, she said, "Ah, I want him for my husband." Now she was none other than Shurpanakha. Shurpanakha was the sister of the magnificent 10-headed Ravana. He was actually the emperor of the world, but for a certain moment in time, he was located in the jeweled island of Lanka. He ruled the underworld. He ruled the higher world. He could frighten the gods with his amazing standing on his head for 40 years and contemplating. He could swallow fire. He knew every magical art, the 64,000 ways of making love. He was a genius. No one could be in competition. She was his sister. They were of the Rakshasa clan. Can you just say that together? Rakshasa clan. That was so wimpish. I'm working hard here. Rakshasa clan. Tikita, 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 boom, boom. Now, also being a Rakshasa, you can shapeshift. You can transform yourself into anything. And she was intelligent, some ability for self-reflection. What's the size of Shoreditch? What's the size of a handsome young man? So she looked at him and she transformed herself into an exquisite, seductive courtesan. Remember, this is a tropical forest. She had diaphanous veils. She had musical bracelets. She had tinkling earrings. And her anklets resounded like gongs through the forest. And as she walked forward straight to her target, the man looked around and he was bewitched to see such an astonishingly good-looking woman in the forest. But before he could open his mouth to speak, she said, "You there, come and marry me. If you do, I can offer you armies, chariots, elephants, navies." At which point the man could recognize that this was a woman who was bewitching, but she was also of the Rakshasa clan. So he smiled, his dazzling smile. And he said, "I'm so sorry, dear lady, but my heart is already taken." And he gestured to his wife, and she came forward. And his wife, Sita, thought, "Oh, at last, after 13 years, maybe I will have a female companion in the forest." But Shurpanakha, however glamorous she was, her nature bit. And she said, "Who is the servant girl who comes in our royal matters? I will have you." Just at that moment, the man's brother jumped down from the tree. And he had a sharpened wooden sword. And he said, "Now look." And she said, "I am looking." My goodness. Two brothers, same family. If he refuses me now, you and I could get married. And she walked with him, her hips so wavy, his heart was pounding. And he looked at her fiercely with anger and loyalty and rage to protect his brother and his wife. And she said, "What are you so afraid of? Look, if you marry me, I can offer you all the things I've offered your brother. And not only that, to the world we shall look married, but I can carry on with the family affair." And the brother looked at her, and she said, "What are you so afraid of? What are you going to do?" Instantly, he took that sword and he chopped off her nose and her ears. The way the blood gushed forth, she came into her original form, screaming and wailing. It was a hurt she could physically bear, but the humiliation wrenched through the air. It shook the earth, and she flew in her form over the trees, across the ocean, and landed with a great big thud in the court of her 10-headed, magnificent brother, Ravana. The earth began to spout fire, and there were rocks falling. The pillars of the big assembly chamber were crumbling. And she said, "Brother, I have always thought of you as the greatest, but look what they have done to me." And Ravana moved forward. And she said, "There I was in the forest. I had heard the woman Sita was there. And I know how much you prized the thought of her. I was going to bring her to you as a prize." And when Ravana heard the name Sita, his heart was racing. He was breathless. It brought back all those memories of how he had tried to win her in a tournament. But she had no eyes for him. She had eyes for that man who was a prince and now lived in exile. Shurpanakha said, "Brother, why don't you avenge this horror they have done to our Rakshasa clan? Bring those two men to me. I shall punish them personally." Of course, she thought if she had them in captivity, there would be a genuine case of having them all to herself. But Ravana had no ears for this. He was now striding across the assembly hall. And he found his golden aerial chariot. He got into it. And he flew out of his kingdom over the ocean. And he landed in a part of the forest not too far from where these three had been exiled. When he got out of his chariot, he saw his uncle lying there, Maricha, looking rather weak. And he said, "Uncle, I want you to become a golden deer." The uncle didn't protest. He knew his life was going to end. The next day, monsoon was going to break in the sky. dark clouds luring, the smell of the earth just waiting for its skin to be dampened. The peacock was strutting. There was something in the air, so he had to fan his tail. The monkeys were shrieking, some nervous, some getting ready to mate. Strange, wild things in the air. And there was the woman, Sita. When suddenly she saw a purple dust, it was sparkling. And suddenly when she looked beyond the bush, she said, "Oh, Rama," she called her husband. "Its fur is gold, and its spots are gems. Oh, look, it's running away. Please, can you get it for me? I would love, after this exile of 13 years, to keep it in the palace when we return." But he, the husband, was looking at the luring clouds, smelling the damp that was going to come into the air. And he said, "Let that creature go wherever it wishes to." And suddenly she flew into a rage, her hair like serpent tails. And she said, "I have never asked you for anything. Just once in 13 years. I want that golden deer." He was startled, quickly picked up his quiver and his bow, and said to his brother, "Take care of Sita. Make sure no beast, no demon touches her." And he ran off, and the deer kept looking at him, wanting him to follow it. And there was Rama, running, strange thoughts in his head. Why did she lose her temper like that? She wanted to come on this exile. Why suddenly only one thing I have asked you? And as he ran, he noticed the deer had tripped over a little stream in the forest, and then it went to a little bush, and then across a mound, and now he was coming to the mountains, when suddenly he realized, this is a shape-shifting Rakshasa. He quickly took out his arrow from his quiver, and he shot it. It struck its mark, and Maricha cried out in a voice just like Rama's. And it reached like an arc of light to where Sita was. And it said, "Sita, help, I'm dying! Lakshmana, save me!" Sita heard it. She began to wring her hands, coil her hair. And she said, "Oh, Lakshmana, I sent my husband to his death. Go, see what's happened. How foolish of me." And Lakshmana very dashingly jumped down from one of the lower branches of the tree, and he said, "Sita, do you think my brother would have been fooled by a shape-shifting Rakshasa? He will come back." And she looked at him, her eyes like angry coals. And she said, "Is this the time you find to make an advance at me?" And Lakshmana said, "Your words are worse than poisoned darts. How could you say such a thing?" Okay, I will swallow my pride. I was here, left to look after you. But I will draw around you a magic circle. Stay within it. No beast, no Rakshasa demon can harm you." And off he went with remorse, with pain, with every kind of rage and humiliated loyalty. He ran off in the direction of his brother. There was Sita thinking, a golden deer. I don't know what's happening. It may be that time of month. And as she was looking out, somebody else was watching. It was none other than the magnificent 10-headed Ravana. But of course, he had shifted his shape into a frail mendicant leaning on a staff. And there he gazed on Sita. Gosh, no thing can create that. Look at her eyes. How simple her form, and yet the rage, the fire, the passion in her. He tried to gather himself, and he approached her, but was very careful not to go to that magic circle. And he said, "Dear lady, I'm so thirsty. Please, Could I just have some water? So she swiveled around, got a pitcher of water. And she said, what on earth are you doing all alone, so frail, unescorted in this forest? And she was just holding the pitcher when he said, oh, I come under the jurisdiction of the great Ravana. He protects everyone. Now the fire was burning in her eyes, and she said, what do you mean by Ravana? He has brought poison into everyone's hearts. All humankind is in fear. We are all ready to eat each other for anything. And Ravana said, well, but that great king Ravana sits on a throne like a king. What about your husband? He's not even here to protect you. I hear he's in exile, wearing tree bark with long hair coiled into a knot over his defenseless head. None of us know till this day what happened. She may have raised her hand to wave aside what this old mendicant that she saw in front of her said. She may have wanted to slap him, but whatever it was, her hand came out of the magic circle. And he dragged her out, shook off his disguise as the mendicant with his 10 resplendent heads. He said, now I will take you back and keep you as my hostage till you agree to marry me. He took her in his aerial chariot across the ocean and placed her in a beautiful garden with the most exotic fruits and plants, and she was captive. And there she sat, listening to her heartbeat. Moment after moment, only 2 syllables in it, of her beloved love, Rama. Her eyes were sinking. It seemed like there was always a sunset in them. The bangles on her wrists were now dropping off, so frail she had become. Weeks passed into months. Months were nearly passing into a year. And even Ravana was getting frustrated with himself. He had everything, a huge city underground, a huge city overground in case he would be attacked. But nothing was happening from outside. And she, this woman with her relentless passivity, she would not even look at him. And then he asked himself, but why am I waiting for her? I have harems of 350,000 women. I can take whatever I want. I can take her. But no, I want her to want me. He had magicians, he had sorcerers, he had astronomers, astrologers. They could turn day for night. Missiles could crack open the most secret vault close to the belly of the earth. So one night he decided, after much drink and clarity of mind, he would play a final trick. His wife was asleep. His 350,000 courtesans breathed peacefully in his golden kingdom. He walked underground into the labyrinthine passages with their metal corridors, their crystal ceilings. All the alarms had been switched off. He came to that little cage where Sita slept. The last whisper of the flame was flickering. Already its hair of smoke was spiraling. She was in a daze. The only thing she could hear in her heart, in her pulse, in her wrists, everywhere in her body was tick-it, 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 boom, boom, tick-it, 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 boom, boom. He looked at her, her eyes open. The sunset was sinking in her eyes. Now they were even dry of tears. The sweat from her hair was all that had moistened her face. Her sweat looked like jewels. The tip of her nose, the quiver of her lip. How it enticed this man, and yet she could sit there like a block of ice, gazing at him. And he said, Sita, I have given you so much time. Look at me. And she looked at the ceiling. And slowly, from behind him, he drew out a head, severed, streaming with blood. It was Rama, his eyes vacant and gouged out, his neck chopped, his long hair with blood swimming around Ravana's fingers. Tick it, tick it, tick it, boom, boom. There's a whole epic after that. I'll come back to tell you next year.